Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and I think this is going to be a weird week. We're heading into what looks to be a relatively quiet year-end for 2021, so I have no clue if any of this is going to get any traction in terms of what I'm talking about here, but I'm grateful for those who care enough to check it out regardless, so let's get on the pulse. So before we go any further, if you'd like to like and subscribe, I would be extremely grateful. Still trying to build up here headlong for the year end, but we got 6 projects on the docket. Let's first go back and talk about, from Patricia Taxxon, the Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe.
Get me on my knees, get me on my knees. Get out my way, get out my way, get out my way, get out my way, get out my...
I swear, I feel like I'm prepping to take an art history class half the time when I review Patricia Taxxon albums, especially one that before it was released was being compared to projects like Foley Artist and was being described as a lot more dense, and also her furry album. But alright, who is Robert Mapplethorpe? Well, he was a gay photographer in the 70s and 80s, known for some extremely striking still life shots, and also a lot of extremely graphic and transgressive material that in some circles pushed the bounds of obscenity and sparked a lot of conversations of what art was worth funding from government endowments. So, alright, immediately I grasped a surface, philosophical parallel and some themes, where Mapplethorpe was powerfully transgressive in the 1980s and showcasing gay sexuality and framing of stark beauty. So does Patricia Taxxon want to approach her queerness and furry identity and sexual proclivities in a lot of similar framing. Well, at least before the album seems to fragment in an apocalyptic, quasi-submissive search for companionship and then confronting father figures. And yeah, we're gonna have to come back to that one. And that fragmentation leads into the shuddering, stuttering glitch of the project, where the Sophie and Autek are influences to drive a lot of the angular but oily synths and jagged percussion, juxtaposed with cleaner, yearning, but also very mournful ambient moments that, I gotta say it, don't quite hit with the same texture that they used to. You'd think for a lot of the wildness of a lot of the content, she would have kept some of that organic sounding texture in the mid to low range of the mix, instead of keeping things so jittery and fragile, with the glitch as more accent to her grooves, especially as the singing is a lot cleaner and more emotive than ever on this project. But no, a lot of these beats feel way more brittle, sputtering, stiff in their low end, coupled with moments that feel less tuneful overall on a project that can definitely meander on its back half. Look, I would not call this one of my favorites from Patricia Taxxon, but going back to the content, where I'd originally put together a piece about how the juxtaposition of internet queer furry subcultures in 2021 with gay culture in the 1980s, especially with the AIDS crisis, felt a little tactless, but in truth, it's a lot less of this album in comparison with the deeply held, heartbroken loneliness in the face of absent or neglectful father figures, that if you're just focusing on the furry aesthetic and the framing and juxtaposition, you're missing the point. Ergo, like with Foley Artist, it is deeply intimate, very vulnerable, honestly really sad. But where that album had a defined arc, this project's more sprawling and scattered, a lilting flower in bloom, with a lot of ideas, but feeling a little tenuous and pulling them all together. I still think it's good, so strong 6 out of 10, but again, not one of my favorites of hers, even though I know for a fact that to a specific audience, it's gonna be way more resonant. And while we're on that topic, from Bent Knee, Frosting. I heard about the controversy for this album long before I actually heard it, mostly because when I see an art rock, progressive rock group with a lengthy catalog, they tend to wind up on my back burner, which is exactly what happened with this Boston band. But now we're reaching the end of the year, and I'll admit it's a catalog I could probably afford to peel through, and oh boy, where do I start with this one? Okay, imagine one of the more operatically inclined women coming out of the 1990s, like a Tori Amos, or early Fiona Apple, or maybe even a little Bjork, paired with some of the most fractured and awkwardly produced progressive rock in the vein of the Battles or Everything Everything that I've heard in recent memory. It's honestly kind of tough to quantify. I kind of like the theatricality and self-serious weirdness that contributes to a distinctive sound, There are not a lot of acts like Bent Knee, and there are some potent lyrical moments, but I find the execution to be incredibly hit and miss, especially in terms of structuring any sense of coherent groove or hooks, and the production, again, serious limitations there. That being said, the greater swagger infused into 2019's You Know What They Mean gave it a little bit more sticking power for me, probably my favorite of their catalog, so I was ready to dive into the controversy with this one, and yeah, unsurprisingly it's a mess, but not a mess that's altogether surprising. Yeah, going hyperpop by way of some very obvious 2000s pop rock influences across some songs, it was inevitably going to throw the prog audiences, but Bent Knee has had a modern pop theatricality for years now, and even if it has led to mixed results, it's not a bad idea. But man, the execution feels really haphazard. And we gotta start with the vocals. If you got a frontwoman in Courtney Swain, who is arguably your biggest selling point as a band, smothering her least impressive performance in chipmunk effects and auto-tune to render her more anonymous alongside some contorted vocals from Jessica Keon strikes me as a complete misstep. It comes across like hopping on a trend rather than adapting or warping that trend to suit their more unique elements, at least at first. By the time we get to the upward spiral, a lot of curdled and ominous riffs are trying to fight against some of the goopy synths, and even as the synthetic elements persist and the songs remain fractured and the grooves remain perpetually undercooked, and Pause was speaker-destroyingly pointless, a fair few of the underlying compositions, they still have that off-kilter but distinctly cinematic and theatrical scope that shows Bent Knee at their best, like songs like Queer Gods or The Floor is Lava, or especially Not This Time. But let's get to the lyrics now, where Bent Knee... okay, I'll say it, they got their moments, but I've never really been grabbed by the writing, and that's kinda true here as well. Thematically, it's got a lot of touches of the Quarantine album that we've heard the past couple of years, but it's a little bit more introspective, and seeing a world full of systems beyond their understanding or control or their ability to fight, a lot of this project collapses inward, with language that implies a lot of regression to childhood, but more as a safe space to test boundaries of queerness or conventional morality, making use of some morally ambiguous framing that's been one of Bent Knee's great lyrical strengths. And I really like how the album ends on a desperate but ultimately optimistic note. At the same time though, I'm torn wondering if Bent Knee are writing what they think they're supposed to do in this subgenre, especially as songs like Have It All and Invest in Breakfast feel a little obvious in their quirkier hyperpop side, even if other moments do feel genuinely heartfelt. So alright, it's messy, but there is a method here, and ultimately it's weird and interesting enough to be worth hearing, but also not really a project I think plays to the band's strengths, and the execution is still really haphazard. Only spots come together for me. So a strong 6 out of 10. It's worth hearing, absolutely, but again, will not be for everyone. I'll say that. Next up from Silent Planet, Iridescent. I sincerely suspect that some of my patrons think that by flooding my schedule with metalcore, at some point I might get into it. I mean, it's not unfeasible, especially if you give me the legit good stuff. And to give Silent Planet some credit, going through their back catalog, I was close to getting on board with this band. The vocals were visceral, the band had a pretty solid command of atmospherics, and it became very obvious that a lot of the writing was a major focal point, and on average was pretty damn strong. And then all the down-tune riffs came back, and I realized I wasn't nearly into this as I wanted to be. Now this time around it came with a shift in their production team, specifically bringing in Drew Falk, who has worked all across the mainstream in a number of genres, and I gotta say, it's certainly reflected in the cleaner, sharper, down-tuned guitars with the occasional math rock flourish, and the occasional inclusion of the drum machines and some more spacious elements to add a little bit of color. I mean, shame that the actual drums sound so underpowered and kind of formless, especially the cymbals, and the bass grooves are just nowhere near as filthy or punchy as they previously were, and a lot of the distorted touches of electronics show exactly just how much Code Orange's innovations, they're just becoming the template in this sound of metalcore. Yeah, the atmospherics, the cleaner hooks, they do help a few of these songs stand out a little bit more for me, and when you go towards some of the content, there are some potent ideas, touching upon mental illness and its juxtaposition with medical and police systems that aren't always equipped to deal with it effectively, at least until we get a song like Panopticon that feels very much like your standard anti-technology screed that kind of missed the memo from Code Orange just last year that you need to take these themes in more nuanced directions to actually make them a little bit more interesting. And that's the frustrating thing. As much as I can respect Silent Planet for their earnestness and their politically charged themes on songs like the pro-environment and the anti-capitalist Anhedonia, and a lot of their more descriptive writing, again, I think they're good songwriters. I feel like it came at the expense of production that lacks a potent or unique identity for this chugging metalcore sound that, again, is not my thing. It doesn't stick for me. It feels scattered, oddly paced, lacking more tune than it should, especially for something still not my genre. So like 6 out of 10. I don't think it's bad. Metalcore fans probably will enjoy this more. Just not for me. Next up from Jon Hopkins, music for psychedelic therapy. Be honest, I'm a little shocked folks wanted me to cover this. And yet, as someone who's gotten a lot more into ambient music this year, I found myself a little bit less impressed with this than I was expecting. Because, while of course the synths hit that blissful crystalline swell with some very gentle murmurs of keys, the occasional gentle shudder within the mix, touches of birdsong and field recordings with lots of splashes of water, all set to produce that ethereal, new age vibe. Well, it's kind of all it does for a solid hour, with very little in the way that reflects anything actually psychedelic or all that weird. You can absolutely tell the greater focus here is on therapy. This is material designed to soothe and relax the mind, or if I had to bring back my ASMR experiment, it would not be out of place in the slightest. And while your mileage may vary on new age meditation material, especially including the surprisingly decent monologue from the late Ram Dass in the final song, I can't deny that in a very specific lane, it's doing exactly what it is designed to do. But even setting aside the expectation of psychedelia, you'd think there'd be a little bit more melodic or textural diversity here. There's very little modulation, the transitions are very minimal, and even if there's enough sparkle to let you know it is a Jon Hopkins album, it feels like the soft-focused, sanitized version of where this ambient music could take us. I mean, it's not bad per se, because again, I think for a certain audience it will absolutely fit the bill and do what it's designed to do. But the larger spectrum of ambient music, this is not that special. Light 6 out of 10. Even by the standards of this genre, you'll forget it pretty quickly. Next up from R.A.P Ferreira, the light-emitting diamond cutter scriptures.
The road to hell is piloted with compliance. Morongo Indian, my fungo simmering. My uncle ain't no simian, Moorish citizen, scuff black dookies.
So okay, I'm kind of surprised that R.A.P Ferreira is putting out another album this year. Even though he dropped his first way back in January, he is a poet with dense sensibilities. So I was looking forward to untangling this one, even if it wound up surprisingly short, under a half hour. And you know, I actually think I like this a decent bit more than Bobson, even if I think the album's looser, it's more playful, and seems to build off of lower stakes. It builds off the sly hedonism of cuts like Abominus Manifesto from Bob's Son, where on his Ruby Yacht journeys across America, he enjoys sidestepping any sort of definition, embracing poetic abstraction in his odd flexes, almost all for its own sake. After all, the flower's only duty is to blossom. And while the postmodernist in him will see a certain amount of disinterest towards defined idealism, the framing's actually expanded a little bit more to encompass the general absurdities he sees in chasing the capitalist hip-hop environment. Hell, just how much he doesn't seem to care about all those conventional accolades or algorithmic prioritization beyond the art for its own sake anymore, that's kind of defiance in and of itself. Even as I actually appreciate more some self-awareness that comes in noting folks will not stick around occasionally to hear more, or the feeling of loneliness that will come on the road when it doesn't all quite land, or the fear that actually will come with trying something new when you think you've got your lane, where the Jackson Pollock reference is very telling. More than ever though, in the scatter painting of bars, I'm getting a much starker parallel with a lot of MF Doom beyond the samples and the interpolations, although with a little bit less villainy, more a traveling bluesman or a pirate or an outlaw who will find themselves on the outskirts and stigmatized just by ignoring the systems, not even fighting them, which in certain moments isn't far from where MF Doom was himself. Overall, it just feels like a lot more balanced and thoughtful project that gets around some of the stuffier, poetic abstraction that was starting to run dry on his last two projects, and I think this production actually helps a decent bit too. The mix shambles across these supple bass lines, the stuttered textures of percussion, and the wheedling keys and warping synths that splash off the occasional touch of jazzier horns, which fits the dreamlike but organic vibe that lends a pretty short album a lot of subtle groove. It's not a lot of production moments that will really jump off the page in terms of any real hooks, but it's such a pleasant listen overall, it's hard not to keep engaged, especially when Ferreira is a really good rapper, especially as it remains so short and sweet. As such, yeah, light 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this. It's not quite as grandiose as Purple Moonlight Pages was, but a lower stakes and easier vibe made this as likable as Ferreira has been in a while, so yeah, definitely check this out. And finally, from Aries, Believe in Me Who Believes in You.
Plug my nose, all this make me feel so alive. Switching lanes, checking my left hand side, I'm never right. Give me a break.
Well, hype behind this one's been pretty damn significant, and not altogether surprising. So, okay, background. Aries is a rapper, producer, YouTuber who I actually briefly covered in a song review on IGTV about a year ago. Definitely plays more to the pop trap, genre-blurring tones, whereas solid compositional instincts were doing a lot of heavy lifting in comparison with the production, and the delivery, and the content that didn't really impress me all that much. But hey, it sounds like he's got a bit more of a budget this time around, tilting a little bit more into some modern pop trends, and this was a short enough project I was interested to take it in, and yet I'm not sure I'm getting all the hype with this one. For one, it's really hard to avoid a Post Malone comparison, circa beer bongs and Bentleys, with some slightly rougher guitars, clunkier percussion, less reverb but more blown out mixes, better hooks but a less interesting vocalist. If anything, what Aries reminds me of is one of the pop punk frontmen of the late 90s, early 2000s, who's got a little bit more grit in his voice when he sings, but not enough to actually rock that hard, which might as well be the story for any groove or guitar texture on this project that's absolutely pulling from that era, but tacking on trap percussion. It feels laser targeted for a very specific nostalgic sweet spot. And yeah, some of the hooks are as good as ever on songs like Bounty Hunter, ETA, Kids on Molly, When the Lights Go Out, or especially One Punch. But this is an album that locks into a singular lane and doesn't really vary itself as much as it really could. More organic bass lines, a more distinctive delivery, or a real sense of explosiveness, that would be appreciated, but Aries just never quite seems to go there. Honestly, it just kind of feels safe in a way that it really shouldn't, and then we get to the content, where I can't escape the feeling this should also have a lot more punch than it does. It's playing very self-aware with how his newfound success might be able to provide some form of relief to those around him, or at the very least his own state of mind away from his vices and angst and bad relationships, but that's not where he's drawn a lot of his inspiration, and thus the struggle comes in finding a balance amidst a hedonistic Los Angeles scene. But I don't know, there's this loose, scattered quality to how Aries creates a lot of his imagery that seems to resist coalescing into more, even if it's rarely obnoxious or actively annoying. Kind of odd when so many of the lyrics feel adjacent to some very basic emo trap cliches, and yet I don't think it helps these hooks hit as hard as they could when the content doesn't come together. So yes, melodically the hooks are good, but they're rarely great, and they're not really amplified by a mix or delivery that are that strong, to say nothing of content that, again, doesn't really come together. So yeah, strong 6 out of 10. I get the appeal, I just wanted to like it more. It's alright, I'll say that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. I'll say it again. So yeah, I know I may have said some contentious things here. For those of you who actually stuck around to watch all of these, comments are down there. Have fun. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to help support the channel and get involved in my Discord, at least before the end of the year, and the schedule opens up for 2022, link to my Patreon right over there. Don't feel obligated, it's the holiday season, I understand, but if you want to, options available. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.